I don't want to brag, but I filled this up earlier. It only took me an hour. But this is the backbone of the British industry, the skip. The skip. Whether you see a hard hat, high vis, or builder's bum crack, you'll find a skip. Invented by Edwin Walker in 1922, the 8-yard skip can carry a staggering 8 of Her Majesty's metric tons. That's the equivalent of 160 barrows of rubbish new build soil, or approximately 8,000 petrol station meal deal wrappers and coffee cups. Holding all of the above and bending the laws of physics to still find space for your neighbour's old mattress. Call now for your skip at your local skip emporium. Skips on every building site across.
What is this?
I'm trying to make my job a bit more interesting. %60 of the time, it goes in the barrow every time. We are in a project in Oldley, Nether Oldley, on a new build site where AstraZeneca used to be. And this garden, when we first arrived, was just turf. It was just lawn, very modest patio. It tends to be the kind of formula which new builds follow, sadly, nowadays, which gives you very limited space for outdoor living and then a pretty lackluster lawn, sadly. And you can't be blamed for the guys who are having to lay it, because it's a case of they're up against it. So any soils are good in, goes into the ground, and then they lob the lawn down, and sadly then it's setting up to failure. So it's a whole rip out on this project, and the client had a very strong vision of how they wanted to get the garden to work for them in order to make sure that they get the most of the aspect that they've got. So over in the back end of the garden here is where the sun will set, and in order to do so, we're going to put a reception space in the same paving. And the thing to mention on this paving, actually, I've never, ever been on a new build project which has listed the use of the most obscure paving known to man. 420 by 420 in slate with a charcoal edging. And this year, as like last year, we've had a lot of hurdles to overcome, one of which is materials supply and delivery. We've got Brexit thrown into the equation as well. So when this is coming out of Ireland, it's had a hefty lead time, took some sourcing for us to be able to track this down and find a match. So we're going to match the existing paving, path all the way up the front, through the garden. So it's going to bisect the garden with 2 areas of lawn either side. Patio area here, because this is where we get the last of the sun. Now we have come up with a very detailed concept render for this, so we'll chuck that into the mix. So hopefully, boom, there's your concept render. And in order to get the level set and all the datums right, we've obviously taken the site level and checked all the orientations and the undulations. It isn't too bad, but we've got a few bits of making good to do. So firstly, rip all this out, reinstate it with all the appropriate sub-base measures. So we'll firstly excavate down to depth to make sure that we've got space for the MOT. Before we put the MOT on, we put geotextile Taram, which is like a white woven mesh sheet which goes down. And then that hopefully, well, should consolidate the ground. We'll make sure we're down to decent ground before we then put the sheeting down, then put the MOT down, and then we've got our level set ready to receive the paving. We've got this monstrosity eyesore of a red engineering wall. Now obviously it's doing a practical service because it's retaining the level, the upper level up behind here, but it's ugly to look at. So we're going to clad this and soften it. So we've got a little pocket of space between the fence and the wall here. Now believe it or not, there are plants, once we've cleaned this out, which we can plant in here. So we can have things like bacopa, we can have albrecia, we can have some herbaceous planting in there, thyme. Lavender we're doing that because it's rocky, constrained. Believe it or not, you can chuck agapanthus in there. Agapanthus really likes its roots constrained. So not that we would, but we've got the option to do it. So we'll be able to soften that little pocket there and actually get some planting in, spilling over the top. The fencing here is great, really big, chunky, robust timbers here. And we're also going to replicate that by having some raised sleeper beds in oak, and then we're going to have a bespoke pergola and some nice big chunky timbers just to play off the fact that we've got these big imposing fence posts and bring that kind of chunkiness, for want of a better word, into the garden. This will be the outdoor alfresco hub. Alfresco, love that. In front of this, we've got a bed of around about 500 millimeters wide, and that's going to have a run of Himalayan birch going in there, and that will lead up to a slightly larger bed at the back corner here. And we're going to get a big multi-stemmed Amelanchier, one of my favourite plants. If you have a look at it, Amelanchier, it's that's how you spell it. That's how you say it as well. Amalankia lamerkii. It's a nice plant. It's a big tree and it's beautiful. We'll just chuck a picture in there so you can go and have a look at the nice tree. I haven't mentioned the mess, so we've got to start clearing all this out. Using the micro digger, which is brilliant, so that's the fact that we've got good access so we can get that in. It's a real asset. So all of this crap and crud here needs to get off site because it's neither use nor ornament. We can't reuse it. The soil here is thick, it's clay, it's heavy, it's got no structure whatsoever. Actually, have a look at that. It's wet. And the thing about this, and I mentioned it's got no real kind of properties or structure. If you're a little root system and you want to get into that, you've got no chance. And it's also got a lot of water in there. So it needs oxygen, it needs some moisture, but it doesn't want to be completely soaked because it will start causing root rot. And it also needs to have a good balance of minerals as well. So this is slightly clayey. It's got very poor composition and it's incredibly wet. The good thing about it is, if you do want to clump it up into a big mud ball, it's great for throwing at other people on site. Anyway, we've got to get rid of it. So it goes in the barrow and in to the skip. Sadly, that's all the time we've got for today's episode. That was a genuine fall. But if you've liked the video, don't forget you can always like and share. Ping us a message down below. Any feedback is good feedback, and hopefully you'll keep an eye out for our next video. Got to go now because I've got a skip to fill. Skip!